When I was a kid, I saw something in my basement. Something unsettling. Something that stayed with me into adulthood. That brought me to the point that I am at right now. I first caught a glimpse of it when I was 5 or 6, probably. The basement door was open for some reason, and I was walking past it. The view from the top of the stairs down into the dark basement below had always frightened me somewhat. I glimpsed down the stairs just in time to see something or someone slinking around at the bottom of the stairs. I panicked and did a double take, but by the time I honed my focus in to where I saw the movement, it wasn't there anymore. That was the first time I saw it. During the course of my childhood, I'd run into what I then deemed the basement man at least half a dozen times, each time equally frightening. One time in particular, when I was 10, I thought myself somewhat brave, so I went to the basement to retrieve my toy car, which had rolled down the stairs. For some reason, the basement door was open yet again. I was confident for the first few steps, but with each moan and creak of the wooden stairs, my confidence level began to drop, and my fear began to rise. Halfway down the stairs, I began to hear low, guttural groaning and moaning, somewhere in between a beast and a man. I could see my toy car. It looked almost cartoonishly red and shiny, sitting right next to the bottom step, with only the light from the doorway above to illuminate it. I made a plan in my head to grab it and sprint right back up the stairs as fast as possible. However, when I reached the bottom, I couldn't help but look into the darkness of the basement. It was almost reflexive. It took me a few seconds to see it. Really see it. There was a figure on the far side of the basement, maybe 20 or 30 feet away from me. It was shaped like a man. 2 arms, 2 legs, hands. Its body, limbs, and hands were all black. And from the way the light from the doorway above was slightly illuminating it, it looked almost hairy. Its face, if you could call it a face, was all white, like a mask, but with the features carved out in intricate detail, making the light from above cast horrifying shadows across it. Its smile was unnaturally wide and unmoving. Its head was cocked to one side. Its eyes were black, almost darker than the unlit areas of the basement behind it. It was on all fours, but crouched, like a lion slinking through tall grass before pouncing on its prey. I stared at it in sheer horror for a few seconds, trying to process what it was I was seeing. All at once, the thing arched its back like a cat and began charging at me on all fours. I dropped my ball and rocketed up the stairs as fast as I could, not looking back, and slammed the basement door closed. I heard the horrible sounds of footsteps quickly moving up the stairs, but it sounded like dozens of them. And then, nothing. I sat there for a bit, waiting for something to happen. Slamming on the door, knocking, pushing, roaring, something. But after a few minutes, there still was nothing. Just silence. Reluctantly, I moved my body away from the door and went back to my room. I never told my parents. From then on, I made a conscious effort to not go into the basement alone, or at all. Whenever the basement door was open, I would occasionally glimpse down by accident, and every once in a while I would catch a glimpse of a white face staring back up at me from the darkness below. the white face with the carved-out features and plastic smile. Even after I got older and moved out of my parents' home, I still never forgot that creature. That thing. The basement man. To this day, I still avoid basements. I almost can't believe it, the hold that thing still has on me. Throughout the years, I faced many fears and overcome many obstacles, but the fear of that thing in the basement I was never able to shake. And who knows, maybe it was just a dream. Maybe none of it was real. Maybe it was all in the mind of a scared kid. There's only one way to know for sure. Only one way to find out. One way to rid myself of this anchor that's been weighing me down since childhood. I have to go back to the basement of my childhood home. I was afraid of a lot as a kid. But as I grew up, I tried to overcome my fears. Fear of the water, I forced myself to jump in the lake at my friend's summer home. Fear of flying, I booked a flight across the country. Fear of tight spaces, I literally went in my small closet and stayed there in increasing increments of time every day until I got used to the feeling. Fear wouldn't have a hold on me any longer. Except for one fear. The fear of the basement man. The creature I had encountered multiple times in my childhood, the monster that still haunted my dreams. My one unconquerable fear. I knew the only way I had a chance of overcoming it was to go back to the basement of my childhood home. It was abandoned now. My parents had sold the home a long time ago and moved south where it was a little warmer. The new owner had planned on demoing the house and renovating, but from what I can remember, his plans fell through due to some financial trouble, and the house just ended up abandoned. It wasn't the most comforting sight for a man who was trying to overcome a deep-rooted fear. The front yard was overgrown, vines and shrubs growing over and under the windows, wood splintering and rotten. The walkway was all torn up, and a few of the windows were smashed in. As I made my way inside, it looked like demo work had started at the very least. There were holes in the floor, and tile in the kitchen was mostly ripped up. The carpet was ripped out of the living room, and all the electrical was ripped out as well. The house was a shell of its former self. I almost didn't even recognize it. The home I grew up in was foreign to me now. What I saw with my eyes didn't match up with my childhood memories. Except for the basement door. The basement door looked unscathed, almost exactly how I remembered it. I slowly opened the door and it creaked, breaking the silence and instantly transporting me back to my childhood. A scared kid, looking down into the darkness below. I made my way down the stairs once again, just like I had such a long time ago. It was the middle of the day, but the basement was still mostly in darkness. The only light leaking through was from small, mostly boarded up windows. I stood in the shadow of the basement, my eyes scanning the corners. This was good. This was good for me. I should be proud of myself. I'm overcoming a crippling childhood fear. No more would that nightmarish creature have a hold on me. I must have had quite an imagination as a kid. I bet if I... Wait. What was that? My eyes darted around the basement again, this time more acclimated to the dark. I began to get nervous. Afraid. My heart began to beat so hard it felt like it was in my ears. Suddenly, on the opposite corner of the room, I saw it. The basement man. He was exactly how I remembered him from my childhood. His white, unmoving face and plastic smile were low to the ground, with his pitch-black hands and arms outstretched on the basement floor in front, supporting him. His spine was bent at an unnatural angle, his legs and feet up on the wall. He was posed like some kind of spider, and he was staring directly at me. And all of a sudden, I was a kid again. A kid holding his toy, staring into the darkness at an entity composed of pure evil. I snapped back to reality and began sprinting up the stairs. In my peripheral, I could see the thing recoil and begin sprinting at me on all fours. I slammed the basement door closed and ran for the door, which was now shut. I jiggled the doorknob and found it was locked. I heard the basement door fly open with immense force. Instinctively, I ran up the stairs toward my old room, into my childhood closet, and closed the door, as if it was some sort of impenetrable barricade. I held my breath and waited. Slowly, I heard the sounds of the basement man crawling up the stairs, at a pace much slower than he had previously been moving. He was taunting me. I heard his overabundant footsteps slowly enter my room, followed by his awful groans and growls. This thing had never left the basement before. Never. And now here it was, about to rip me open, or eat me, or whatever it was the basement man planned on doing. As I recounted my previous run-ins with the basement man in my head, one similarity started to emerge. He only ever showed up when I was afraid. The more I feared him, the more I thought about him, the more aggressive he would be. He was dependent on fear. It fueled him somehow. Or at least that's what my panicked brain came up with as an explanation. The only way I'd be able to escape him was to not be afraid of him. But it was too late. I was terrified. And yet somehow I knew I had to try. I heard his footsteps and noises getting closer and closer as he circled the closet, waiting for his moment to get to me. I took a deep breath, and with my heart racing, I flung the closet door open. To silence. No basement man. No footsteps. No more growling. To this day, I will sometimes wonder if what I saw in that house was just in my head, or if maybe my small amount of bravery required to open that door somehow was enough to keep the basement man at bay. I'm inclined to believe the latter, because every once in a while I'll find myself thinking of the basement man again. His contorted body, barely illuminated, crawling at me from the shadows. And my heart will start beating a little faster. My breathing starts getting a little quicker, and it's in those moments that I swear, when I look at an unlit area, I can see a ghostly white face and a wide plastic smile staring at me from the darkness. Fear is an interesting thing. It affects different people in different ways. Some people are afraid of spiders, some of snakes. Some people are afraid of the dark. Some are afraid of the sea. Some are afraid to leave their homes. Some are afraid of heights. Some are afraid of death. Many are afraid of death. The type of fear didn't matter to him. It all tastes the same. Mackenzie Davis was 6 when she first encountered the basement man. Only it wasn't in a basement. It was in the woods surrounding the family home. It was dusk. The world seemed to be covered with a bluish-gray filter. Her father had called for her to come into the house for dinner, but something in the tree line caught her eye. Movement. A glimpse of something white. The white face of a figure looking very much like an emotionless, plastic mask. The rest of his body was dark, void of light, emanating what looked like faint smoke. He stood slightly behind a tree. Light fled, making it harder to see. Mackenzie squinted her eyes, then she saw him. The basement man. Only from her perspective, he was simply a figure in the woods wearing a mask. She stared for a second, and then walked towards him, her eyes fixed on his pale white features, until she stood merely a few feet from the mysterious figure. Slowly, she reached out her hand to touch him. All of a sudden, her father's voice echoed across the large yard, calling for her to come back to the house for dinner. She turned toward the voice, and when she went to look at the mysterious figure again, it had vanished, and she was alone once more. She glanced around for him, wondering what had made the odd creature run away. She told her father about the figure she saw in the woods. "Oh yeah?" he said, his mouth full of food. He swallowed and looked his daughter in the eyes. "You know, it sounds like a story I read in a book one time." The basement man. "What book?" his daughter asked. "Just an old book of stories. Maybe one day I'll show it to you, when you're older." His daughter looked at him, puzzled. "The man was in the woods, Dad, not the basement." "I know," he chuckled. "He's just called the basement man because that's where the author of the story was when he first saw him. I guess he can appear anywhere." "Like the woods?" his daughter asked. "Like the woods." His daughter chewed and thought. "Dad?" she asked. "Why is he all alone? Doesn't he have any friends?" "Not really, sweetie," her dad responded, chuckling. "Why not?" she asked. "Is he mean? He seems sad." "Maybe he's just misunderstood." Her father patted her on her head and collected the plates. "All right, Rosebud, time for bed." Mackenzie saw the basement man every so often while growing up. He appeared in the shadows of the concert hall during her first piano recital. She caught a glimpse of his white face under the bleachers during her volleyball finals in high school. She saw him watching from the darkness when she opened up her college acceptance letter with her father. But he never came as close as he did that one day in the woods when she was 6. Until the day her father was killed in his home, by burglars. She was 24. She saw the basement man in the road as she sped toward her father's home. Panic and fear set in as to what she might find when she got there. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the basement man sitting in the back seat. She pushed harder on the gas pedal. He had been shot. Her father. His body lay sprawled in the middle of the trashed living room. She sat on the couch and sobbed. The basement man looked on from the window. A few days later, she was back at her father's home, cleaning some of the mess and organizing his things. She sat down on the couch once again and began to zone out. He was gone, taken from her. The person who she relied on most in the entire world now ceased to be. She felt overwhelming loneliness, overwhelming sadness, and overwhelming fear. Fear of how life would be for her now that he wasn't around. Fear that his death would be meaningless. Fear that even a man as kind and mild as her father could be taken from the world in such a violent way. Through the corner of her eye, she saw the basement man observing her. He was on all fours in the corner of the room, his face twisted to an unnatural angle as he watched. She suddenly began to feel fear even about him. The basement man, her silent observer who had been with her all these years. She had never felt such fear before. She buried her face in her hands and breathed deep. Upon removing her hands, she was startled to discover that the basement man was now right in front of her, only 2 feet away. She gasped and looked at him. He reached out to her, the same way she had reached out to him so many years ago. She closed her eyes. She felt him touch her forehead. And all of a sudden, her fear was gone. She opened her eyes quickly as if awakening from sleep. The basement man was gone. She no longer felt anxious. She no longer felt fearful. It was as if he had eaten all of her fear and anxiety. She still mourned the loss of her father, but now she did so with a clear head. Her father was taken from her. He was shot. No, she didn't feel fear anymore. The basement man made sure of that. And as she thought about the situation with this new altitude, her fear was replaced with a new feeling. Anger. Mackenzie stood over the man, his torso and face bloodied and bruised. He shivered in fear. Mackenzie leaned in close to him and pressed her knife against his temple. "I am done being so nice to you." The man blubbered and wheezed. She pressed the knife a little harder to his skull, to where it was almost breaking skin. "Tell me how I can find your partner." The man's heart raced. As he looked up at Mackenzie, he saw behind her at the corner of the room a dark figure with a pale white face.